Okay, hi everybody. On behalf of Flagler Cares and One Voice for Volusia, welcome to the 2021 Health and Human Services Summit. My name is Jim Clark and I will be the moderator for this session. You have joined the session titled The Importance and Dynamics of Child Caregiver Relationship. All participants will be muted. There will be a Q&A time at the end if you want to ask questions. You can also use the chat function to ask questions, or you can raise your hand and we will ask you to unmute yourself. If you have requested CEUs for the session, please make sure camera remains on throughout the session. And thank you to the sponsors who made this event possible. Advent Health, Career Source, Flagler Volusia, SMA Healthcare, Magellan Complete Care, Department of Children and Families, and the House Next Door. It is my pleasure to introduce you to your trainer for the session, Lisa Benitez.
Hello, everyone. If you had just listened to the keynote, I need to take a deep breath from that. It was very powerful, and it's hard to follow up from her stories. I am not as dynamic as she is, but I will do my best in making these next 2 hours relevant and helpful if you work with families. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and thank you, Jim, for that introduction. I am a licensed mental health counselor, clinical director with the Presbyterian Counseling Center, and you may hear my dog Mayo in the background. I think he must be protecting me from someone walking by. But I am a wife, I'm a mom. I grew up in Volusia County. I'm a product of Volusia County schools. I teach at Daytona State, and I love our community. As a result of that, I have spent a lot of time, energy, and effort and commitment to understanding dyadic practice and infant mental health and development. I'm currently a student at Fielding Graduate University in the PhD program for infant and early childhood development, where I want to hope and eventually bring to our community a more comprehensive, what we would say, system of care that understands the birth to 5 population. So with that in mind, I'll be sharing a screen and some various things with you today. And then at the end of our presentation, because there are some links that I've embedded in the PowerPoint and some things that I'm hoping you'll walk away with today. So I'll have that available for you as well. Because I'm a relational therapist and I believe in relationships, I need you. I need your help to make this time together more effective and relevant. So I hope along the way you will unmute or ask to be unmuted, use the chat box, share with me your thoughts, your stories, your energy. It'll help make this time, I think, a lot more valuable and impacting. And maybe if you'll write somewhere nearby or just think in the back of your mind, if you left this presentation today, I want to learn this, and then this is what I want to do with it. And maybe along the way, I'll hint, hey, this is probably a good thing to follow up on later. So I'm hoping you'll do that. With all that in mind, all right, I will go ahead and share my screen. Now, some of you may have heard me speak on this before. I see Jancy's on the call. I can't see you, Jancy, but I know that we've seen me before present. So I'm hoping that there'll be something new to this presentation, and I'm hoping that there's something different that may be helpful in your work. Because our work with this population, the birth to 5 population, as you all know, is extremely imperative. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about infant mental health and why that is. So as we spend the next 2 hours together, I'm hoping that you'll have a better understanding of child development, especially in the context of the relationship with a primary caregiver. And I even changed that word caregiver because sometimes we say the word parent child, but we live in such a diverse world with so many, what I'd say, different types of families and different types of dynamics within relationships within our homes. And so we are no longer just dealing with biological parents. We're dealing with grandparents. We're dealing with aunts and uncles and cousins and foster parents and caregivers that may not even be relative caregivers. So we have so many different family shapes and sizes that I thought it was important to make the relevant language shift and realize that we are all caregivers. And also, when I'm thinking too, and appreciating our early learning environments and our teachers, they too are caregivers. So there's something about how we as a caregiver for children need to understand a little bit more about that dynamic, that dyad. I also want us to look at how trauma impacts a young child, both emotionally and physically. We're going to look at a video and understand some of the work by Dr. Tronick, who is with the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. Dr. Tronick's work has been specializing in serving and returning, and we're going to look a little bit more into that. We're going to look at some of the science that goes into what I call diminished responsiveness in serving and returning dynamics in relationships. And then I am going to end our time together just highlighting what child parent psychotherapy is. I'm a trained child parent psychotherapist. We have some in our community who offer these services. So in order to promote this work, I thought it would be important that you two know a little bit more behind it, in case there's someone that you want to encourage CPP for, or that you think would be helped by CPP. So just you had a little bit of understanding of what that is. So what is infant mental health? And I think that poll was asked of you when you when you joined the session, but it is meant to help people better understand the science. There's a lot of science in this work of how social emotional capacities are built upon the child's primary relationships. And a child thrives, they grow because they are in relationship. Now, most of us probably didn't realize that to some degree, because we think, oh gosh, if they're being fed, if they're being rocked, if they're being held, well, doesn't that help them grow? But if they do not know the context of safety and security within a primary relationship, they actually stop growing. We call it emotional dwarfism. There's some words for it. Failure to thrive, I think, has been used sometimes because we know that's an absence of food or nourishment. But a child will actually not grow and not advance if they do not have someone they can lean on and look to and rely upon that provides them the basic necessities in life to feel protected and grow and be strong. So knowing that a young children's social experiences also depends on the love and care that they receive from those relationships. So to take it a notch higher or another level is that it's not just good enough, unfortunately, that there's someone there, but the quality of that experience, the quality of that relationship, then also dictates how the child is then developing socially and emotionally. So infant mental health looks at the quality of the relationships between that child and their caregiver. And we have ways that we can help improve that, ways that we can help bring it to someone's awareness and attention so that in turn, the child will grow. So what does the data tell us? I love this website and I didn't have like a current report, so I have to stop and share. And if you haven't checked out the DCF website, I want to take you there now. So you'll excuse me as I go through this. I have to stop sharing that one screen and then go to another screen. Oh, let me bring that up. I wish I had background music, but I don't. Okay, here we go. Share screen. What I love about this website is that it is current. Oh, I wonder. Let's see. Oh, here we go. It is current as of last month. You can take it to a statewide level. You can take it to a region, a circuit. You can take it by your CBC, your community-based care, or in our community, it's Community Partnership for Children for 3 of our counties in our circuit. And then St. Johns County has their own CBC, or you can take it by county. And as you look through this website, it's very well designed. I think it's user-friendly. And you'll see as of today, or as of date, and this is looking at, let's see, the date range to March 2021. And I don't know how much it's going to let me interact when we're live like this, but it'll show you as of March of 31 of 2021, it'll tell you how many children we have in care. So this is giving me an indication we have here in Florida, basically about 22,447 or 22,500 in average. And you'll see this map go up and down. You'll see how it varies. And I know that if you do work within child welfare, you will unfortunately hear how cases did rise as a result of the pandemic. Our child welfare workers did not have any reprieve and did not get to work necessarily from home because they needed to be in the field and doing their investigations and helping protect children who were at risk of harm or had been harmed. What I also like about this website is you can go here, it'll show you gender, it'll show you race, and it'll show you the types of placement. So what you'll notice here is the biggest number of our children are in foster care. Now that's staggering, right? Is that, now here, this is interesting, and this is where the removal is different than the foster care, I want to say, right? And Jancy, you may be able to help me because I'm even noticing like how the numbers are a little different here. But when you think about how these numbers are so high, that's why we're here today, because we know that young children are being affected. And then you can also go by age. So you see the highest amount age range are 1-year-olds. Now, how many of us really have had special training in a 1-year-old? Not many. I mean, we think about child development, but knowing that the majority of the children are birth to 5, that's why I do this work. That's why I'm here, because they are the most in need, the most fragile, as Dr. Carrioff would say, most vulnerable. And yet a lot of us assume that because they are not necessarily talking, they're not using sophisticated language, so they can't really tell us what's going on. So there must not be anything going on with them. But what we know from the science is they are in fact tremendously impacted by being removed and placed in the child welfare system. And their experiences and exposure to trauma have profound impact. Now I'm going to pause here. Does anybody have any questions about the website or anything so far of what I've said? No. Okay. I'm going to stop share just so I can go back to my PowerPoint. So there's the website if you'd like to break that down yourself at another date, another time, or want to take this on to some of your colleagues. So looking at development, I'm going to break a few of the domains of development down. You probably already know this because I realize I'm probably talking to my people, that many of you are doing the same work that I'm doing. And so some of this may be redundant or you've already heard this. Just want to quickly go through this and try to get to the more relevant areas of infant mental health. But we do have various disciplines or domains of development, just like we have speech and language development, we have cognitive development, we have gross motor, which is our full body development, we have fine motor, which is our hands, and we have social development. And so social emotional development has become quite the hot topic lately because we have been seeing an increase and rise of how our young people, our children, are experiencing more emotional challenges and social delays. And so why is that? Why are we now of a generation that has children who are bringing guns to school and wanting to kill their peer? Why are we having cyberbullying where children are saying terrible things such as go hang yourself or do something terrible to yourself that you deserve that? I mean, this is an everyday real struggle that our young people are having. And so what is it about the social challenges and emotional development within our populations and the birth to 5 and older that need attention? So for definition purposes and for the sake of moving forward, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that emotional development includes the feelings of yourself and others and all the social rules, standards, norms that we all kind of adhere to, apply to, learn, model, represent. So all of that encapsulates what social development is for the person. Now, emotional development is thinking more about how we control and regulate our mood, how we manage our feelings in culturally appropriate ways, how we express our feelings about ourselves and others. So, want to distinguish those two words or those two domains. So, both with social and emotional development in mind and relationships with others, this is what we know is the crux of infant mental health and why it's so important that we pay attention to that dyad, to the child caregiver relationship. It's through that relationship that infants learn what's expected of them and what to expect of other people. They're watching us all the time. If you've ever been around a little baby or have a baby yourself or had a baby, their eyes are on you constantly. If you move, they move. Or it kind of reminds me of too with our pets. I know that, well, we have two dogs, but one of our dogs in particular is very, very attached to my husband. And wherever my husband goes, he follows. Wherever my husband is, there you will also find our dog. And so children are no different. They are very attached to who they know they belong to. And children inherently know who they belong to. If we were having our ears plugged and our eyes closed, we could smell each other out. Before we had feelings, before we had thoughts, we had our senses. And we knew biologically, it was built into our physiology, who we were associated with, because those senses is what we leaned on. We leaned on what we saw. We leaned on what we heard. We leaned on what we smelled and tasted and touched in order to give us comfort. And so through consistency, through nurturing and protection and stability and consistency of that same person, there was something that we then learned as an infant that knew, hey, this is my person. This is who I belong to. Now, in turn, because that child was attached to that person, we also know that that person's emotional well-being can impact also the quality of that child's health and that caregiving relationship. So when we look at a child, we cannot look at them in isolation. We cannot just treat a child in isolation from their family unit because they are impacted by what goes on within those caregiving relationships and within the dynamics of the family. So we have to treat and look at the dyads. We have to recognize that wherever there's a child, there's a caregiver somewhere. And we have to be able to treat both that child and that caregiver if we want to see that child thrive, because they, again, know who they belong to. Infants and young children share and communicate feelings in many different ways, even though they may not have their expressive language development yet. We are able to receive information before we can express it. We can talk to each other, we can talk to a baby, and even though they may not be able to reciprocate that, they start to understand, hey, someone's looking at me. Someone's giving me attention. Someone's kind of looking and doing things with me, like cooing and making sounds and giving me attention and touching me. So there's something about that level of communication that children start to understand. And through those interactions, infants and young children start to develop a sense of competence in their relationships and how to be within the world. Now, we can't teach those things like we're doing today, where I can cognitively share this information on the screen and talk to you about it and you engage me back. This is all modeled interaction. These are all experiences that have to happen in the here and now. We're going to break relationship development down, and I'm realizing when I formed this slide that I must have not had it all jump on the screen at once. But here we go with, in the first 3 months of relationship development, there's a lot going on prenatally, but we know once a child is born, postnatally, those first 3 months, a child starts to, well, actually, let me go back. It's all about the parent and what the parent does for the child. So this is where bonding starts to occur, where a parent recognizes what a child is telling them based on the sounds of their cries, based on the little grimaces they may make or the little gestures they have. So a parent responds to the child. That's important. As that child does that, a parent will maintain a closeness to the child that feels protective. So in turn, that child starts to get that sense of closeness, that touch, that proximity, that they know, oh, This is, again, my person. This is who I belong to. Now, I say that in a manner of cognition. It's not a cognition yet at that point. I want to be mindful of that. It's not something they have thoughts about yet, but it is something that they start to experience that brings them pleasure, that is something positive. And through that sensory load, through that brain activity, then they start to experience what we would say consistency and reciprocity to some extent. That's when we know, like, a child will start to identify where there may be someone who's different that I'm used to. And the parent will start to nurture the child. So this is really important. So when I think about infants that are in care and there has been what we believe a substance abusing parent, we have substance exposed newborns, unfortunately, that are in our NICUs across the state, across the country, across the globe. And they have yet to experience, possibly because they're in a NICU bed, what it is to feel a responsive parent or someone who's close to that child. That's where we have programs that are holding our babies. That's where we have situations where we recognize how important it is that we have some stable caregiver, that we are allowed, different than the story that Dr. Carriot said, we are allowing our parents to be in our rooms with our babies because we know that a child needs that in those first 3 months. In the next few months, from 3 to 7, we start to see the child respond a little bit to that. We start to see them smile. They vocalize. They have some emotional response to that person, that caregiver, that parent. And as they do that, the parent will offer comfort to the child. And then the child allows themselves to be comforted by the parent. So you start to see that level of engagement occur in 3 to 7 months. 8 to 12 months, turning on a year, the child then uses the parent as a secure base so they can explore the world and then welcomes the baby back to celebrate their accomplishments. So around this time, if you know gross motor development, this is where the child will start to crawl, maybe even start to walk. And that exploration is because now they're mobile. They no longer need you to move about. They have their own little body to use, and they start to experience what it's like to be a little more independent. And as they explore, it's really important that the parent allows that baby to explore and allow to move away from them a little bit so they can start to understand that, hey, this is how we do this. As the child experiences that exploration, they also encounter then more strange situations, and they may have a little bit of anxiety as they leave that safe place or secure base. And as that happens, we want the parent to understand that when the child exhibits fear or a need for touch, that the parent can offer that sense of closeness. In 13 to 18 months, so from a year to a year and a half, with the parents' exploration or with the parents' encouragement, the child will be even more able to wander and explore and seek comfort whenever they're feeling uncertain. And as the child starts to express those uncertainties, the parent will then be kind of an interpreter. Like, hey, it's okay if you pet the dog. Oh, look at the kitty. Kitty wants a little petting. So that parent leads the way in encouraging the child of how we do this, how we explore the world is the parent models it, the parent shows it. From a year and a half to 3 years, the child will start to become more individual, and the parent will provide opportunities for the child to make choices, such as, hey, I'm going to give you 2 options for food. Which one do you want? Do you want the pear or the apple? Which one do you prefer? The child will also start to manage their wants and needs within the context of where the parent's limit setting is, and they start to test those a little bit. So sometimes we call this terrible twos. Terrible twos is completely expected. We want the child to start testing limits as they understand this is how we learn from the world. Also, around this time, the parent will help the child with exploring their coping skills, how they manage their feelings, what they're experiencing with their feelings. So when a child cries, the parent understands it's okay to be sad. It looks like you're mad right now. So the parent will even start to name for the child, this seems like what's going on. And also around this time, you'll see the child starts to understand their social circle and that there's other kids who look like me. And gosh, this is what we do when I'm around other people or little people. We start to experience things together. And with that parent support, the parent encourages that. Before we move from relationship development, any comments, questions? I'm hoping it was clear that as the child develops socially and emotionally, it's all within the context of a relationship. The child cannot do this without there being a caregiver. Okay, great. So thinking about brain architecture. So what does this all have to do with the brain? Oh, and I guess I have a drop down here. There's a comment. Oh, you love this. Thank you, Katie. Thank you. So thinking about brain architecture and why is it so important that we understand our brain? We live in a very cool time of history, that we are of sophistication and development, that we have the capacity to study the brain in a way that helps us understand real-time events. Sure, probably you've all seen the images of brain scans and different things that we can tell what parts of the brain are active and what's going on within a child's brain or our brain. But that science is helping us also understand how these authorizations, you'll see in the second bullet point here, basically experiences create this whole activation of these neural circuits, and that instruction of all that connection that's going on within the brain actually is forming what we would say active knowledge that the child is going to rely on and need as they grow older. Now, we are also a product of genetics and environment. And so the two things combined with those relationships and the physical conditions in which we live do shape our brain. It can affect how we grow. This development progression does depend on appropriate sensory input. So going back to the senses of what we hear, smell, taste, touch, and see. All of that sensory load within the context of healthy relationships, we know there in turn develops a healthy brain. So I'm assuming most of us on the call, if not all of us, have finished school, have maybe even gone on to college. And so we can all safely say, for the most part, that we had some level of consistency and stability in our lives that helped us have a healthy brain, to the point that we could retain information, earn a degree, get some education that we now can have a living from or have a job from, because there was someone there. We had an it person. But we know that not all our children have those experiences, and it can affect our brain and neural circuitry. Oh, having a little hard time here advancing the screen. Oh, there we go. So in order for me to show you this video, and I am going to ask for your help because I'm hoping this works, I have to stop sharing, and then I have to go to the video on a different screen, and then I'll share again. So let's try this. But I really want to show you this video if you have yet to see it. This goes to the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. So give me a nod, Jim, if you can see it, please. Awesome. Okay. And you know what? I may stop share one more time because I think I was supposed to hit a button to make sure you hear the audio. Let me make sure I hit that because I don't remember if I did that. Share sound. I did not. Okay. Let me try one more time. Thank you for your patience with me. All right. We're going to, well, I got a little unsubscriber. Hit that. Now, can you see the expanded video here when I expand it? Let's try one more time. So Jim, can you see the expanded video on the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, here we go. About a 6-minute video that I'm hoping you could hear. So please tell me if you cannot. You can hear it?
Did you know that you
Yes.
can build a child's brain? Everyday interactions can have a big impact on developing brains throughout childhood, starting even before babies can talk.
Scientists call this serve and return, like a game of tennis or ping pong. A child serves by showing an interest in something, and the adult responds in a supportive way.
Finding moments throughout the day to do it is easy and fun, and you'll be building strong brains. You can use 5 steps to practice serve and return with any child. Step 1, share the focus.
When a child is interested or curious, you can see it.
What's this? It's a stroller.
Watch this child look at something in a book. Right there. Pointing shows interest.
Cow.
So does making a sound, like this child. And mom is paying close attention.
See baby moving those little arms and legs and focusing on the ball? That's a serve.
The key is paying attention to what the child is noticing.
Oh, you like those guys too?
Look at Grandpa sharing the focus.
By noticing serves, you will help build curiosity, and you'll strengthen your relationship.
Step 2, support and encourage.
You can return a child's serve by saying a word of encouragement.
That's right. Very good.
Watch Grandpa return this serve by saying thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Even a facial expression can encourage a child.
Orange.
Or emotion, like this mom dancing.
Time.
You can also pick up the object that the child is pointing to and bring it closer.
We need help to sit her down.
Things like helping and playing with the child let them know that their thoughts and feelings are heard and understood. Step 3, name it.
Yeah, the puppy. See the windows, the house.
When you return a child's serve by naming what they are seeing, doing, or feeling, you make important language connections in their brain.
He's got bumps all over him, huh?
This brain building happens even before a child can talk or understand your words.
You can name anything: a person, a thing, an action, a feeling, or a combination.
Clean up, everybody do your shit.
When you name what a child is focused on, you help build understanding of the world around us and what to expect from it.
The baby's sitting. Ooh, the baby's sitting in the back seat of the car.
You like those? Those are raisins. You have raisins all the time.
Naming also gives a child words to use later and shows that words are important to you.
Step 4, take turns back and forth.
Taking turns helps children learn self-control and how to get along with others.
Waiting is crucial. When you return a serve, give the child a chance to respond.
How are you? I'm good. How are you?
Note that the caregiver waits here for the next serve.
See this toddler navigating a new adventure? Grandpa is waiting patiently, returning serves by asking questions and then waiting to see what happens next.
You want to cover it?
Yeah.
Are you cold?
Yeah.
Oh, put this over your lap like this, okay? There. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Oh.
By waiting, you give the child time to develop ideas and build confidence and independence.
Step 5, practice endings and beginnings. Children signal when they're done or ready to move on to a new activity.
Watch how this child shows it's time to start something new. Letting go of a toy signals an ending. Then picking up a new toy signals the next beginning.
Want to play with the giraffe?
Sharing the focus is important in this step.
Ooh, the big eagle.
Because this mom is sharing the focus, she notices when her child is ready to end one activity and begin something new.
X, Y, and Z.
When you can find these moments for a child to take the lead,
Want to try this one?
you support the child in exploring their world
Would you like to play with something else?
and make more serve and return interactions
Yeah, you wanna
possible.
sit there?
Serve and return interaction is critical for a child's developing brain. And the best news is that you can do it anytime, anywhere, without any need for toys or technology.
Look for small opportunities throughout the day, like while you're making a snack or while you're grocery shopping. What matters most is that you're doing each of these 5 steps. Notice the serve and share the child's focus of attention. Return the serve by supporting and encouraging. Name it, take turns going back and forth, and practice endings and beginnings.
Serve and return interactions make everyday moments fun and become second nature with practice. Try practicing with a child today.
I love that video. I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts. Hoping you're there, you can still hear me. Have any of you seen that before, or was that new? I'm hoping it was new. And I'm thinking, even though your camera's off, oh, you've never seen it, Katie. Thanks for sharing that. And that's public domain, that's public access. So all you have to do is go to the Harvard website, the Center for Developing Child. No username or password is needed. And there's several videos on there. It's a very simple strategy. Yes, they have great videos, Cynthia. So a very simple strategy to help with understanding child development and how critical that relationship is, how much that parent, that caregiver engagement is critical for that child as they grow and thrive and become more interested and engaged in the world. All right, I think I've answered all the comments. Anything else? Nope. All right, let's go back to my slide show here. And I know the video already did a really nice job of articulating and giving you the 5 ingredients for serving and returning. But we do know that there's so much that goes on between that caregiver and that child. And so as we think about it and from a cognitive perspective, or I guess you can say like a visual image or a thought, as the child naturally starts to interact through their babbling, their facial expressions, their gestures, we as that caregiver can respond back. We as an adult, no matter what your role is in that child's life, just mirror it back to them. And that affirms to them that you see them, that you experience something that is on the same page with them, and that will inherently give them a positive experience. Serving and returning has also been used as like a metaphor is what we do in a game of tennis or volleyball. And so there's this back and forth. Now we live in a world of constant interruptions. I'm sure as you've been on the call today or on this video chat, just like you probably heard in my background, I've got someone outside in our neighborhood mowing their yard. A little interruption, or I bet your phone has gone off, or you may have an alarm that's telling you it's time to take your medicine, or there's something going on that you need to send a text about. So we are constantly in a world where we are being interrupted. Now, those little interruptions when it comes to parent-child or caregiver-child relationships are what we would say expected and understood. But what we want to look at are when the responses to that child are unreliable, inappropriate, absent, then unfortunately the development of the child will be disrupted. And those disruptions can lead to later in life struggles such as delayed learning, behavioral challenges, and health issues. I didn't spend a lot of time in this workshop today because of the focus on the dyad and the focus of the caregiver-child relationship, but I will touch a little bit on trauma. We know that the Center for Disease Control has spent so much time and energy and resources over the last 2 decades in understanding how trauma impacts the health, and our children are no different. Our children can have health issues. Our children can be impacted by stress, even as young as an infant. So they are no different than the rest of the population when it comes to a little bit of even what Dr. Karioth said about how trauma and grief affects us all. When those serving and returning interactions break down, there can be some barriers to that. And that's why we're all here today, is to better understand how we can help our families that may have barriers in those relationships, but economic hardship, social isolation, chronic disease, adults' mental health, substance abuse, all of these are barriers to that caregiver and being able to consistently respond to that child. And caregivers who are at highest risk for providing inadequate care, unfortunately, often have several of those problems at the same time. It's a domino effect. Over time, these neglectful acts or patterns of interaction occur in every culture, all income levels, with all races, ethnicities, religious groups. It doesn't matter where we are on the planet, that we all are at risk of sometimes what I would say being affected by the world and how it affects our relationships, and especially if we're a parent and how it affects our parenting. I'm going to have to do this one more time where I stop the share, and then I have to go to another screen where I do have, it's not letting me change that. I have to do that over here. Okay, still face experiment. Now I'm thinking a lot of you have probably seen this video before, and this is called the still face experiment. Now, Jim, are you seeing YouTube in front of you and a little baby? Can you give me a
Yes.
nod? Awesome. All right. Expand the screen. Another quick little video.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
preface, some people have a hard time watching that video. Whoops. I have this going on in my background. Sorry, I still had YouTube playing. Okay, here we go. I didn't warn you though, and I apologize for that. Then it may be hard to watch as the parent. Yes, I don't like it. I don't like it either, but it happens every day. We don't realize how much a child needs that caregiver to respond to them because we're caught up in our stuff. We're doing adult things and parent stuff, and we just think, oh, the baby's fine, right? But in these type of experience, we can clearly see the baby's not fine. Now, in this experiment, thankfully it's an experiment, the mom was immediately able to return and say, it's okay, I'm here, and that the child can move on from pretty quickly. But if we take it to another level, we often see people that are gone, either physically, mentally, emotionally, for much longer periods of time. And that's when we know the child is heavily impacted by the stress of the absence of that caregiver. Any comments, thoughts other than what you're putting in the chat? Anyone else want to share? Yes, I wish we could show it to all infant toddler teachers and childcare centers. I agree. I agree, Jancy. And most of them, I believe, are getting that. We at Daytona State, myself included, because I adjunct there and I do teach a lot of the infant mental health courses at Daytona State. We do see the child care workers coming through the program that are getting some level of instruction, and the director of that program has been there for a long time. So she does know how important it is that there's some level of social emotional I should say training that they get, that it goes beyond kind of the operations of child caregiving or early child caregiving, but it also goes into the relational aspects of child caring or these group settings for child rearing. Just like you saw through the Harvard Center that was on YouTube, anyone can get it. The link is embedded in this presentation that I will be sending you. But if you just Google search Edtronic serve and return experiment on YouTube, you'll find it. And there's a ton more on there as well, where you can see a similar video. All right. Go back to sharing my PowerPoint. And those are the only two videos that I'll be sharing with you today. So, and we have just over another hour. The focus of the remainder of our time together is going to look at how that serve and return dynamic, whenever there's a lack of response or a diminished response with the caregiver, what does that actually look like? And why is it important to pay attention to that? And then what do we do when we see it? So through the combination of neuroscience and biology, epigenetics, behavioral and social sciences, we've been able to take all this work, turn it into public policy so we can change laws and change practices so that we can see children are better cared for and that we have improved responsiveness from caregivers. We are just seeing better practices. This framework has also been used to help and improve strategies to protect vulnerable children, especially whenever there's just been world life experiences that have presented complex challenges for these children, and we know that their development has been impacted. Now, thankfully, in our part of the globe, we do not see the fourth level of response or lack of responsiveness. So you'll see the first three. I'm not really going to get into the fourth, but there is a grid, and I'll explain a little bit more because we don't really have what I would call like orphanage settings. There are some countries in our planet that still do have group settings for young children, but thankfully in our world, we don't really see orphanages anymore. We try to we do have some group homes, but still they're very small. They have a high what we would say high caregiver / child or low low child caregiver ratio, meaning I guess for every few children, there's one caregiver. So the children are getting very responsive care. And then we have, of course, our foster care system, which is primarily homes. And you know what? Actually, I say that and I'm going to eat my words here, and I don't want to get political. We have seen in the news, especially at our borders, where we do know that there are unaccompanied children at our border. I'm going to separate all that from this because we have been making active efforts, and we call it the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, the ORR. I know the ORR is trying to work very diligently on making sure that we do not have young children that are kept in care. So I'm going to take all that away from what we're talking about today, but within our control and within our government and our child welfare settings, we are able to apply the science and work diligently on helping our children grow and thrive. So the occasional inattention, there's considerable variation, cultural dynamics, circumstances, context between parents and caregivers when they may not respond in a timely fashion. And sometimes our children don't have someone always there. That's just the nature of the work. That's kind of the daily grind, and that's okay. And if it occurs on an intermittent basis in an otherwise loving and responsive environment, there's no need for concern. Actually, some developmentalists or some developmental scientists actually say that to be able to not have a parent always there can actually help encourage that child to grow on their own. And the child will start to eventually distinguish themselves from others. So a child needs to learn that you're not always going to be there, and it allows them to problem solve. It allows them to work towards a greater independence and maybe take care of themselves and not always have someone there all the time. That's where most of us are. And that's where we want most kids to be, is that occasional inattention. Another level, though, is when we go into what we would call chronic understimulation, where the caregiver starts to have ongoing diminished level of attention, that fails to be there for the child, that fails to talk to them, that fails to engage them. This is where my work starts to become helpful, or what you're here about today. Even with this little bit of knowledge that you're walking away from this presentation, or maybe you already had some before you joined us today, but just by understanding this a little bit more, you can help. You may notice if a child isn't being talked to. I'm going to put my husband out there, and I think I told him I use him as an example. Now, my husband is Mexican, and we were older parents when we got married and started having children. And I remember being pregnant, and I had already, obviously, I was a counselor and I was already learning about a lot of this. And I remember telling him, talk to the baby in the belly. And he's like, what? I'm not going to talk to your belly. Why would I do that? And so now he understands clearly that that level of engagement with the belly, the child can hear you, the child can see you. And so that was an intervention. Me just saying to my husband, hey, talk to the belly. That's all it takes, is just that encouragement, that little probe, or that little, what we would say, cue. And that can be very helpful because, like my husband's experience, he didn't have a lot of child development. He didn't have someone that was encouraging him or teaching him about those things. So he didn't quite understand yet because he hadn't been a parent about how important serving and returning is. And many of our parents may be that same way. A lot of our parents may have a very limited understanding of the developmental needs of young children because, unfortunately for them, they probably didn't have a consistent caregiver. They probably didn't have someone who taught them these things. Now, there's many things that may be causing the caregiver to have a lack of reciprocity, or that back and forth, that serving and returning. And I mentioned earlier mental illness, but there could be some social and geographic isolation. So I think about our families through COVID. There's a lack of interaction that unfortunately occurred as a result of the pandemic when we were quarantined. We knew that we were seeing cases rise because of social isolation, and the stresses of those events impacted our families in tremendous ways. But there's also the stress of poverty when we have both parents out of the home working just to keep food on the table and the lights on. So there's maybe not a consistent caregiver there. There may be a family member's physical illness. There may be some discrimination going on. So there's all sorts of barriers that may impact why that child is being engaged. So it's important to understand all these factors and how there can be some strategies to address those needs and start to encourage healthy returning, serving, which are just simple voluntary interventions. And so the videos that I've shown you today, that would be considered a simple intervention. Hopefully, just by watching that video today, if you have plans to be around a child or early child later in the day, you may engage them a little bit differently just by watching that video. Any comments, questions so far about chronic understimulation? No. So moving into a third area of unresponsiveness is where we start to see more severe neglect within the family. This is where we would start to see a significant impact on the child's health because there's a significant absence of that child being engaged. The magnitude of this neglect can often be associated with a child or maybe associated with the child not being provided some basic nutritional, medical, and educational needs. And unfortunately, children who experience this level of deprivation, we start to see already on a social, emotional, or relational level that they are more fearful, that they may not have the ability to trust and feel safe with others. And so this is where our child welfare system takes these children in to care, because we now need the public intervention to help bring this child back into what we would say stability and safety, and then help get that caregiver or adult some level of treatment or intervention to see if we can bring them to a place where we know they can parent that child effectively. In an institutional setting, I know I already said in other places of our world, we'll see like warehouses where the staff may not have a lot of training, and we believe that the children are experiencing very little serving and returning interactions. There's a lot of staff rotations. So in many of these circumstances, the children may be fed, the children may have diaper changes, but they are not necessarily knowing who their it person is. And through this, there can be some pretty significant psychosocial deprivation. There's a little grid. Now, just by showing you this today, and this could also be a simple intervention for many families, if we just bring into their awareness to get them to reflect. Even I myself, who am a parent, I'm like, last night when my child asked me to do this, I was like, oh, and I told him I needed to make dinner. I probably could have handled that differently. I probably could have said, hey, come join me and help me make it. Or can you talk to me while I'm sitting here at the stove? Or I can't do this now. Can you give me a few minutes and we'll take care of that later? So even just recognizing how we respond to children is really helpful, because a child, again, needs that stability from us as they grow and thrive. And you'll see along this grid, it shows you both the features of it, the effects of it, and then what we can do as an action step if we notice there is what I would say going on this more third category, and maybe even some in the second column here. Any questions, comments? Are y'all still with me? I need that serve and return. I need that engagement. Yeah, we're with you. Okay, Jim's nodding, smiling. Okay, good. I know that's the one thing, and I think even probably many of us, yay, you're here, thank you, can recognize that Zoom is a wonderful feature, but it does unfortunately limit some of our engagement. Okay. Right, so the impact of trauma. Taking a deep breath, because it's hard to see and learn and realize that the birth to 5 population has been exposed to stress to the point that it's traumatic, but we do know it happens. Children are born in a world that we cannot always control or predict or always keep safe. And as a result of that, learning more, understanding more, and how these things affect the child's health are imperative. There's been a ton of research, a ton of studies in this work. It started, I think, probably in the areas of postnatal depression, when we see children who have postpartum depression. Mothers with postpartum depression. We started to notice that we were having depressed babies as well. The children were withdrawn, disobedient, aggressive. In my references section, I highlight what we would call a sentinel article within the field of infant mental health called Ghosts in the Nursery. If you have not read that article, I will email it to you. It's a great article by Selma Freyberg, who started this work many years ago. She's called the mother of infant mental health, but she was basically asked to do some research and some case studies on depressed moms and understand more of the impact on children. And through her work and her treatment strategies and ideas, infant mental health started to be developed and researched. But that's where some of the earlier research can be seen. Let's see, there's a comment here. Not a question, but a comment. Information's great, not only as a mom, but to 3 kids, but you're a supervised visitation monitor and always looking for resources to help parents better bond with their kids. Great. Thanks, Katie. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I became so much of a better parent when I started doing this work and realized how significant my role as a parent was, not just to keep a job and keep food on the table and the lights on, but how much my children needed me and how I could respond to them in different ways that was more positive and health encouraging. Stress can affect the ability to remember and transmit verbal information. So for children in particular, if they're in that constant state of fight or flight, of that stress response, they are not going to grow. They are not going to learn. I know we hear about this in the public school system all the time, and there's a reason why we as a state and many others have the free meals for breakfast and lunch within our school settings, because children cannot learn if they come to school hungry. If that brain is not fed, if that brain does not have the nourishment it needs to work well, then that retaining of information and the ability to focus on what they need to be doing in school will not occur. And so that stress response, no matter the age, even us, I'm sure we've all been what we kind of call hangry. Sometimes we're hungry and angry. It's that stress response. It affects our ability to concentrate and to retain information. So it affects us all, but especially young children, because they don't have yet the awareness of what's going on with them. So it's really important for us as caregivers to recognize and to be able to read the cues and understand basic development as to what a child needs. Unfortunately, because of trauma and the impact of stress, we are seeing high cortisol levels in traumatized children. And I think a lot of us probably already know this. We call cortisol the stress hormone. It's typically released very early in the morning. It's supposed to give us clarity of thought, kind of give us the ability to navigate to get to the bathroom, because that's typically what most of us have to do when we first wake up without stubbing our toe along the way. It's like, oh, okay, what am I doing? What's going on today? Let me go to the bathroom. So that cortisol is secreted to help us adjust or transition from that sleep to alert state. But what cortisol also, unfortunately, is a part of is it's released during the stress response, again, to give us clarity of thought. If we are in a situation where it is what we would say fight or flight, and in our previous in my previous presentation, someone had shared an experience where they needed to be able to think beyond, I can't even tell you, millisecond action. And I believe that was a cortisol secretion that they were able to basically save themselves from an impending dangerous situation. And we've probably all been there or heard stories where people have done things with incredible strength or resolve, even though they may not have believed they could do that. But it was because of the brain's activation of the stress response that all these hormones are secreted that can give us that added strength, that added focus, that added energy to get us through really tough times. Trauma responses are no different than those critical events. For a child, if their safety is compromised, if they are no longer feeling secure, and there's chronic exposure to stress, they are having those secretions happen all the time. Our body does not know how to differentiate the difference between a home where there's yelling and fighting compared to a car accident. Our brain responds the same way. Any comments, thoughts, questions about that? There's a book later that I will talk about with child parent psychotherapy. Oh, my screen's not advancing. Where the book, the title, obviously Don't Hit My Mommy, is an interesting title, but why would we title a book like that is basically my question. Why is it a whole book is written about a child who recognizes that their mommy is being hurt? Well, in our child welfare system, we know that the majority of our children are taken into care because of substance abuse and domestic violence. So just by a domestic violence situation and a child being aware of that, by hearing that, maybe not even seeing it, just by hearing it though, by hearing the loud voices, hearing the crashes, hearing the screaming, a child feels threatened. And then in turn, when a parent is threatened because of the violence in the home, the child feels threatened. And there it goes back to the child starts to have that trauma, fight, flight, or freeze, that brain, that neuro response, because it feels threatening to them. They do not know the difference. Any comments, thoughts? Another great book, Don't Hit My Mommy by Lieberman and Van Horn, if you want to learn a little bit more about that. So what are some of the symptoms that we see within children who have been traumatized that may need some attention or some professional referrals, some care, some intervention? We may start to see a child who displays very little emotion. They may not show interest in sights, sounds, or touch. They may reject or avoid being touched or held or playing with others. They may have a difficult time being soothed or consoled. They may be unable to comfort or calm themselves. You may see them more fearful or on guard, may have a startle response that is atypical for them. They may not turn to familiar adults for comfort. So going back to that still face experiment, within my work, when I do that experiment, and there's different assessments depending on the child's age. So you can tell in that video that child was still really not very mobile, right? They probably 6-9 months in there. And so if a parent left the room or turned to still face and then returned to an active face, how we would know whether or not there was possible disruption in that relationship or a pattern of neglect is if we would not see the child respond to the parent's still face. Does that make sense? So if the parent's face went still, the child would not show a reaction. If the parent's face went active, the child's face would not go active. That's when we typically know there's something going on. And that's where we would see from an infant mental health perspective that this dyad, this dynamic probably needs some attention because the child is not responding to the adult. The child is accustomed to the adult not being there. Makes sense? I can get a head nod. Okay, great. Thanks, Lizette, for turning your camera on, by the way. Gives me some of that serving and returning. And then if we do see some sudden behavioral changes within the child, let's see, we got a chat. Yes, thanks, Katie. All right, so that's what we would look for with infants and toddlers. Now, if we want to think about some behaviors that may indicate some more emotional. Oh, I think I had some things. Actually, those 2 slides are out of whack. I'm just realizing that should have been your slide. I'm like, wait, I think I've forgotten something here. So behaviors to look at if there may be some emotional or mental health problems. We already did the infants and toddlers. And then for preschoolers, if we notice that the child is having a hard time playing with others or objects, if there's an absence of language or communication, they may be frequently fighting or having conflict. You may see them as sad because typically preschoolers are pretty happy kids. But if we notice that we have a child who's more sad, maybe even more fearful, there's probably something going on with that child. We may notice that someone or preschooler may not have an appropriate response to a situation. They may laugh instead of crying. They may be more withdrawn or very active. There's some skills that they once had mastered, but now they have seemed to regress, such as toileting, language, gross motor, fine motor skills. You may see a change in their behavior. They may be more accident prone, or they may be destructive to themselves or others. So those are some things to look for. And it's important to consider these things because I don't want to take these behaviors in isolation. We want to make sure we're mindful of frequency, duration, and intensity. I think you can see my 3 fingers there. I know I have the mental health the green ribbon on the back of me because I think most of you know May is Mental Health Awareness Month. But when I think about frequency, duration, and intensity, looking at any of these behaviors, we don't want to just take one day as, oh, something's going on with this kid, we need to get them help. Let's look at what the pattern is. How habitual are we seeing these things? Do we understand why the child may be having, was there a change in the home situation? Did the family recently move? Is someone in the hospital? There could be all sorts of things that are leading up to this affecting the child. And then let's look at how long the child stays in that place and how long it may take for them to rebound or recover or repair from that. If the child doesn't naturally respond, what I would say within a few weeks, maybe even a couple months, then we're noticing probably there's a need for intervention. And what I say is probably 3 months is what we would say in the diagnostic manual for mental illness, the DSM. That then leads us to there's something more critical going on here and that we probably need some intervention. So please consider this, how severe it is, how many weeks or months has it been occurring, how long does it last, how does that behavior compare with the behavior of other children that same age, and are there some events in that home that may make that behavior better or worse? Any comments, thoughts, questions? All right, we're here at 2:13, a little bit more time. So if you're seeing these behaviors and these considerations lead you to some concern, if you'll do a couple of these things. Now, I'm trained in a modality called Circle of Security Parenting. And in that curriculum, it tells us the path to security. It's a nice little graphic. And it really applies to all of us, not just to parenting. But if we notice there's a disconnect going on, if there's something going on within our world that doesn't quite make sense, we need to reach out. So reach out to the family, reach out to a colleague or supervisor, take into consideration and reflect on any cultural norms or cultural differences that may be going on. Get more information, seek me out, talk to me, seek professional help within your networks or systems of care or resources. But before we start to jump to conclusions, and we live in a reactive world, and I think you all know what I mean by that, it's really important to just take a step back and reflect before we jump. Making sure that we have knowledge and information before we pass judgment or make a quick decision. It's always important to think and pause. You're going to ask that. How would you approach multicultural parenting in the same home? So, Katie, if you don't mind unmuting, I'd like you to just explain that a little bit more, what your question is. How?
No, essentially, I was going to ask, how would you approach two parents coming from different, ethnicities and how they grew up culturally in parenting? Maybe one has more of an approach where they are, one likes to talk about, certain things that are going on when it comes to discipline, and one is more of showing or just there. I've noticed that there's a big difference in racial and cultural approaches when it comes to parenting and discipline. And so how would you say that this is more of a coverall, or does it vary, between cultural differences, I guess, in just parenting in general?
I don't know how you could, and thank you for all that. I don't know how you can parent absent of culture, because how we were raised within our cultural norms, within our environments, there teaches us how to parent. We weren't given an instruction manual. We didn't give this guide when they started becoming parents, like this is how you do it. They really lean on their understanding of how they were raised as children. So I guess if we're concerned about a family that is different than us, that may have some cultural differences that are more obvious to us, and when do we know if it's impacting the child? I I think a couple steps that may be helpful is have a meeting with them. And what I sometimes do is, and I think most childcare settings have this, I know within our community we can do this. We have assessments available to measure where a child's development is. So I would probably get some type of like general assessment first. I would see if we can do an ages and stages questionnaire, an ASQ, which we have available to us through Help Me Grow or the pediatrician. And let's take that ages and stages and present it to the family and then see what they say. And if we notice during that meeting, as we do what we were all supposed to be doing, is measuring children's development along the way, if then we start to notice the family's response to that does not seem as responsive, going back to the responsive grid, then that's where we can consult a little further. But most families will tell us like, hey, I know this is kind of different than how you do it in the States, or this is different than what maybe other families do. So I do think starting with a developmental assessment will be helpful. And then from there, present it to the family and see where that takes you. I'm hoping that's helpful, Katie. And again, I'm available if you have further questions about some of the child assessments out there and what's available to help determine where a child's development is.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. And because this work is so specialized, there's not a lot of people like me. I will preface it by saying that not many people have advanced training in infant mental health. Our FSU, Florida State University, the Center for Prevention and Early Intervention Policy, is where I received my infant mental health training through the Harris Institute, but that program has since dissolved. And now we have a master's program through University of South Florida, where you can get a master's degree in infant mental health. And then there's only one PhD program in the world in infant mental health. And that's the program that I'm a part of, which is through Fielding Graduate University out of California. It's a remote learning program. And so it's distance where I can do all my classes online and through Zoom. But there's only one in the world. And there's a few more master's programs across the United States and some internationally. But infant mental health is definitely growing, and we see it here at USF. And I'm the chapter chair of the Northeast Central Florida Infant Mental Health Chapter. And we do have some infant mental health trained clinicians in our community and others that are endorsed that can provide guidance and help. So I'm here helping you connect to those resources. It's what I love and it's what I do. All right.
I have a question about language.
Sure, Lizette.
can I ask
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. And I remember you from yesterday, Lizette. Hi.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
hi. And when we have like parents that talk different languages, and I know that constantly, usually if it is Spanish and English, and the child has difficulty with the language, learning English or learning any other languages, the tendency that the Spanish parents tend to do is like they stop talking Spanish. And I don't know if that is something that you recommend, or what exactly is the approach that your learning has teach. What is the best?
What's the best to do, like in bilingual homes, or especially these immigrants, like families that immigrant to our country that were now they have to acclimate or adapt to the English language? And what do we do with that child that's being reared in a primarily English speaking world? Is that what your question is, Lizette? Like, how do we advise the parents?
Well, because what happens is if you have a child that has developmental issues, the tendency is to say, stop talking one of the two languages.
Mm.
So my question is, what is the research really show? That is the best approach or not really?
So when we, and gosh, I don't know if I can quote any research offhand, but anytime there's a developmental delay, we first want to see if we can identify specifically what that delay is. So if there's a speech and language delay, that may be different than a gross motor delay or a social emotional delay. I do think individual differences will play a part in how you treat that kind of case. But if a child does have a speech or language developmental delay, I think what most will tell you is go to the native language and start with that. Start with a native language and then use that as the primary resource to determine how the child goes from there. So if the child was introduced to Spanish first and learned Spanish first, then that's where we need to start with, because that's the child's frame of reference and that's their filter. And then along the way, we may need interpreters, or we may need some interventions to then start to help that child with addressing those delays. But we do know, and I have a husband who's bilingual, so he'll tell me this all the time, and sometimes he'll do this, where he has to interpret first what I'm telling him. And Lizette, I'm assuming you too are bilingual. I can hear by your accent. But right, you have to first take in the language that is different than the language, right, that you've learned, right? So I'm speaking to you in English, but you are having to translate quickly. And then you have to think again about how you're going to say it in the language that came your way. So there's a lot of brain activity going on in that. So with a child who has delays, we just want to slow that down a little bit and remove that barrier so we can really identify what's going on with that child. So that's where I say go back to the native language that that child was first introduced to, and then individually adapt their treatment to what we've identified, what could potentially be going on. And if it is a speech and language issue, I know we have ESOL programs in our schools. We have bilingual providers in our community who may be able to help. And then for me as a practitioner, if I need to do more teaching and learning in Spanish, then that's on me, or I get an interpreter. So there's all sorts of things that we can do to help get that child back on track. Is that helpful, Lizette?
Yes, it
And
is.
I think
Thank
it'll
you so
help
much.
the parents too. And I think that will help the parents if they can be comfortable in their language as they address their child's developmental delays. We want to ease those barriers of that information being received. So already there's a lot of pressure from acculturation. There's a lot of stress on immigrant families or families that are having to adapt to a new way of living. So if we can remove some of those stressors, I think we're already helping and improving that dyad between us as the provider and that parent and that child. We want to try to remove some of those stressors. Okay, great questions.
Well, I just feel like in the school system, at least, where the tendency is to.
I understand what you're saying, Lizette, because the majority of the people do not speak that language, right? So we are forced, I guess you could say, by the lack of resources to just do what we know, which is to provide the families that information in the language that we know. But it does fall on us as the provider. And I even think there are some DCF mandates, because I want to say there was, and it's probably some time ago, and you all may know of this case where it was the responsibility of the agency to have the interpreter. It is not expected that the family comes to us knowing how to speak, how we speak. It is our responsibility to adapt and pivot to meet the family's needs so they can have the access to services. There's a comment in the chat box. Correct. The agency should provide the interpreter, correct. And that if we sense there's stress or there's a breakdown in communication because there's a cultural or language barrier, it falls on us as the provider. Okay. All right.
I just want to say one more thing about that. The tendency of the Spanish parent is to stop talking Spanish and start talking English at the home. So then what they do is then you have a child that then doesn't become bilingual any longer. So then in the future, then it affects the kid in a way.
Right. A lot of confusion. Right. So how do we let that parent know or communicate to them the knowledge that there's nothing to be ashamed of nor is there anything that they have done wrong. Because that's the part where I go back to the stress response. I don't ever want a parent to feel like they can't be themselves in their parenting. So if that is being communicated on a subtle level, like they're doing something wrong, then that's bad on me. Like that's my issue to work through. That's my bias, my implicit or inherent bias, and being ignorant to my actions, whatever it may be, my lack of reflection. So I think all of us as providers need to be mindful of when we may be expecting something of someone that may not be realistic or necessary. And I know those situations happen and they're heartbreaking. But even if you walk away today, and I think I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, if there's something that you can walk away from this and learn and do something a little differently, maybe that's a place to start, is how we interact with people, what we ask of them or may expect of them. Are we doing that through a cultural lens and recognizing that people of all different cultures and backgrounds, they have done nothing wrong because they're different. Now, how we communicate to them and how we engage them as the professional, that comes on us. That's our responsibility to adapt and pivot, not the other way around. Okay. So thinking about child-parent psychotherapy as we wrap up, I'd like to spend the last 30 minutes and tell you a little bit about what I think is some great work coming out of infant mental health in terms of treatment and what we can do with these families. I already mentioned the book, Don't Hit My Mommy. You'll see Lieberman and Van Horn are quoted here, where emotional behavioral issues must be addressed in the context of the caregiving relationship, that we do not see a child in isolation. And in fact, from a therapeutic perspective, the relationship is the client, that we are there to focus on that dyad. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Lieberman, or is it Patricia Van Horn? I'm sorry. Patricia Van Horn passed away a few years ago. And actually, I just saw Dr. Lieberman at a training not too long ago. And there's been many people who have worked with them both who are taking this work and carrying it on. So Dr. Lieberman is still practicing through the University of California at San Francisco. There's a child trauma research program. And through the work, we are seeing how many of these issues that we've talked about today, when we know that children are not getting the type of responsiveness in their caregiving that they deserve and need to grow, we are seeing great outcomes from interventions and strategies through child-parent psychotherapy and through the research that is done there at San Francisco, California, and also what we're seeing across the state, including here at USF. There's a lot of research going on in our own state. But it's all with the premise that it's trying to improve the social, emotional, behavioral, cognitive functioning in children who are exposed to violence within their home and other traumatic events, that there's actual ways we can repair that rupture of trust that the child may in fact have, which I guess you could say learned because of trauma in the home, and that we can help enhance that parent's capacity to learn how to protect that child and to help in regaining a sense of security and safety in that relationship. The treatment does focus on that dyad and how there are factors within the environment, within those interactions that affect that relationship. So it is long-term, but it is one of the few treatments within infant mental health that is empirically supported. So there's a lot of science that went into this. So it's a textbook, or what we'd say manualized treatment. And that's what Don't Hit My Mommy is. If you read through that book, that'll tell you if you want to learn more about CPP. It is a multi-theory perspective. It's psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma, attachment, social learning. So all those theories are integrated in the approach, and it really takes children's development and gives guidance rather than instruction. So it's more of what I say, a partnering alongside them versus an authoritative kind of life coach. It is meant to be more of a silent presence in the room than someone who is what I would say overbearing, or no, overbearing is probably not the right word, but not overtly engaged, but more subtly engaged. Here's some things just to be thinking about. And what I want to preface, and there's so many people in this field mental health and who work with the birth deprived population that may not be trained in child parent psychotherapy. But if they have some of these skills, then we know that a child is getting what, and the family are getting, hopefully, what I would say good treatment or quality treatment, because at least the provider has some level of understanding about these important concepts, that they need to be good observers and understand children's behavior. There needs to be some level of understanding that they are the conduit, so they help interpret what's going on between the parent and the child. There's a capacity for self-reflection in that provider. That provider has some level of child development understanding, social emotional development, adult development, mental illness, developmental psychopathology, trauma, and we've already been talking about culture. So if you are a provider or you do this work and you've had training in some of this, not that you would be doing CPP per se, but you can already be doing some really effective work with families just by having a deeper understanding of how all these areas are relevant to the development of the young child. Some language that you may hear. Ghosts in the Nursery is the article that I mentioned earlier from Selma Freyberg, which basically references how we were parented. And if there's some things that haunt us from our own parenting as a child, it may show up when we become the parent. There's a need to help in communicating safety and being empathetic towards that child. There may be some trauma to work through, some mood regulation or some regulating of affect that needs to occur. And we want to improve that reciprocity. Going back to that serving and returning video, we want to be able to see more engagement going on between that caregiver and the child. And it is long-term. It can take a long time to do this work. So what can we do? We are not all clinicians. We're not all trained in infant mental health. But what can we do to help nurture children's emotional, social development and their mental health? Well, we can start by this, knowing that it's important to surround children with nurturing relationships. And what nurturing is just notice them. If they're pointing at something and they want to tell you about the slightest detail as to what's going on in their world, be interested in that. Show them that you heard them, that you listened to them. Create a trusting environment by creating a safe place that they can come sit in your office or be in your space and there's a toy on their level that they are welcome to touch and they are welcome to play with. Understand when they may be cueing you, when they may be asking for something and it may not be clear, but it's clear enough that you can pretty much surmise or get a good understanding of what they want. Try to spend some unhurried time with them. The video didn't talk about this much, or no, actually, well, neither of them really did, about when we do engage the child, how long does that last for? We believe that if we can give a child about 15 minutes, and not just a child, probably anybody in our lives, if we can give them 15 minutes of uninterrupted time, that's a good quality engagement with people. If we think about, you've had me for 2 hours. Now, how often are you spending time with someone for 2 hours uninterrupted? Not long, right? We don't do that very often. And I don't know all that you're dealing with on your end of the screen. You've had me for 2 hours, but it's not something that typically happens in our world. And so to expect that of each other, to expect that of ourselves is unrealistic. And just because we don't do that does not mean that we're not good enough parents. But if we can be more intentional, at least with finding some unhurried, uninterrupted time with our children, and 15 minutes, they say, on a daily basis, actually, believe it or not, is good enough. And consider what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how it may affect our child, which is expanding our reflective practices, our reflective capacities. They say that too can help improve a child's emotional well-being, their mental health, and help them grow in their relationships. Any comments, questions? These takeaways make sense? I hope. Okay. Here are some websites. If you have yet to check out the 0 to 3 website, there's a ton of information on there that is available to you. Now, they do have also a membership where you can join and you would get their magazine, which I have right here. And because I have this background, oh, I don't think I'd have to unshare my back screen here, but let's see. Nope, I'll unshare my screen when I stop the video, but they have a 0 to 3 connections book that you would get, like a journal that you'll get that has research in it. And then there's lots of trainings that are available to you if you want to become a member. They also have various books that you can purchase. So there's a discount that comes from a membership with 0 to 3. And then the Florida Association for Infant Mental Health, which I want to just do a little plug for. I hope it's okay. And I am not being paid in any way, shape, or form to do this. And so no one's giving me any kickbacks. I just love this work. And I'm hoping you want to learn more after today. But we do have memberships for students, for professionals, depending on your availability and what you can do. But if you want to become a member of the Florida Association for Infant Mental Health, I'm happy to do that. And yes, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint. I'm happy to share that. And our vision and mission for the Florida Association for Infant Mental Health is basically that we want to see all children in Florida that are within, I guess you could say, growing up in our world, that they are emotionally healthy, equipped to learn and nurtured to develop their full potential. And we want to support and strengthen our workforce so we can serve all young children and their families. So this is for any level of training. It can be someone who is an early learning provider. It can be for a case manager. It can be for a service worker in an agency that sees these populations. It does not matter. You can actually get more training and become endorsed in infant mental health. And I'm happy to talk to you if you have further questions about that. So in conclusion, we know that if there's a significant absence in serving and returning interactions between a caregiver and a child, it can produce serious psychological, physiological disruptions to that child and lead to a lifelong struggle with learning, behavior, and health. And there are a lot of programs that can serve adults facing these challenges so they can be better parents. And even if they may not focus on the child will inherently benefit by adults getting better care, I guess you could say, because we are building that caregiver capacity and expanding the family resources that we know can actually be more preventive in nature and help our children thrive and grow. Ton of resources here. I call these the giants in the field of infant mental health. Alan Shore, Selma Freiborg, Ed Tronick was the man that was in the earlier video from Harvard, Charlie Zena. All these are great places to start if you want to learn a little bit more about what I've talked about today. And here is my contact information. This number is my landline. I do get messages. I do not answer it directly, but I do get messages if you want to reach out, or email is always the best way to reach me as well. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm actually going to change my video background so I can show you what's going on behind me. Let's see. Okay, there, now you get to see my little office. So here is the magazine that I mentioned, so 0 to 3 connections. And it's just a little simple, it's not too thick. You'll get this with your membership. And I ordered something from them recently and they gave me a ton of goodies. I got like this flyer, I guess this is a poster that I can hand out. It's called Growth With Me posters. And then, not that I need another copy of this, and Jancy, you may relate, they sent me another copy of Safe Baby Court Team stuff, which is something we do called Early Childhood Court in Florida, where we are implementing the science and helping with integrating child welfare practices.
Can never have enough baby court material.
I know, right? So they always want to send you goodies. So it's worth the membership if you are interested and have a little bit of money to invest in your professional development. I think it's a good membership to have. Any questions, comments, thoughts? And I have a ton of stuff here too. I'm happy to email you. I think you all are now getting the point that I love this work and I want other people to love it just as much as I do. So I'm here to support you in that, whatever I can do. Any questions, comments? No. You get out early today, so you don't have to share at the screen. Survey Monkey. And so there's a survey here that Jim has posted online. I guess that's to rate me. Basically, I welcome your feedback. I do what I do because I love teaching, but I also learn from you. So I need your input if there's something that I've said or done that can maybe be improved. I welcome the feedback. Okay. It's been a pleasure. I'm hoping that you have learned from today in some way, shape, or form. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for loving our kids and our families. And you all know how to reach me. If you want to reach out at another time, you're welcome to do that.
I probably will be reaching out to you. Sorry to interrupt. I know you were on a roll.
That's okay.
Now that I'm at Early Learning Coalition, I have some new challenges with my 0 to 5 kids. So I'll probably be reaching out.
I would love that. I know Early Learning has been doing a lot of work within endorsement. So the Florida Association and ELC has been working a lot together. And I'll just highlight a little bit about what endorsement is. But after, on my name on that first slide, you saw some of my credentials after that. So if you have primarily focused a lot of your energy, attention, education into this work, you can start to have a few more letters after your name if you want it. But it is important to be recognized for the work that we do. Unfortunately, there are some people who may not have quite the background or training, and I'm not here to minimize someone's effort, but it is important that we not just talk the talk, but we can walk it. So if we say we know what we're doing, we really need to be able to show that. And that endorsement is being able to say, hey, I've had a lot of training in this work. I kind of do know what I'm talking about. So that's what endorsement is. And ELC is bringing a lot of their workforce up to endorsement levels. I am about to take my endorsement exam, and I am one of our local reviewers. So soon I'll have some of those letters after my name too. Endorsement's fairly new to Florida. We've had it implemented now for just 2 years. So I'm about to take that big test. And then I'm also helping others get endorsed. So any other questions, comments? Y'all have been great. Thank you for all you do. Hope you have a great rest of your day. If you'll please take that survey, and Jim, if you need to wrap us up, I'm guessing you do, right?
Yeah, please fill out the survey. It's actually, I think it's for the whole event. So yeah, and you can also, when you're done, we have a sponsor profile and there's a virtual exhibitor hall that they kind of encourage you to go look at. So we hope everybody enjoyed the 2021 Health and Human Services Summit. Thank you.